G'day guys, we are coming to you live from the CBA Centre of Excellence, and in the moment we are deep in the sheds. We haven't recorded a podcast from here yet. You'll see a bit more of this area throughout the season. We'll add a few more to the lockers and whatnot as well. But I thought I'd just give my live reaction. We've obviously had some big news today over in Tiger Town. The West Tigers, of course, David Nofoaluma, a long-serving player there for a long period of time. Also the club's highest try scorer of all time. He's been a stalwart of the club for a very long time. It hasn't always been smooth sailing, though, let's be honest here. He today has been released by the West Tigers. It's obviously been brewing for quite some time there. I think if you have a look over the last, 6 odd coaches of the West Tigers, I think David Nofoaluma at some point has been dropped by each and every one of them. So Nofi's been a fantastic player for the Tigers. He holds records there. He's had some fantastic moments. He's done some incredible work out of his own end. But I think it has been pretty evident for quite some time that it wasn't a perfect marriage. And when it came to Luke Brooks, my argument was him and the West Tigers separating. Not all divorces are bad. And that was one that was definitely not bad for me. I'm really looking forward to seeing how Luke Brooks goes over there at the Manly Seagulls. I think he'll do really well. And David Nofoaluma, this is another situation where I look at him and the West Tigers and I just think, you know what? Once again, not all divorces are bad. I don't think this is bad for David Nofoaluma, and I really don't think this is bad for the West Tigers either. Now, they are a team that I think lacks outside backs. There's no doubt about that whatsoever. And this hurts. Definitely this hurts. But for one reason or another, or for whatever reason it might be, I think it is very clear that at the moment, David Nofoaluma and the West Tigers aren't seeing eye to eye. It sounds like David Nofoaluma and Benji Marshall aren't seeing eye to eye either. So I think this is necessary. I think it's a good move by both parties. I think it's very evident that the West Tigers, they are trying to enter a new era. They've got rid of the board. Luke Brooks has left. I think it makes sense for them to move on David Nofoaluma. I personally thought that when he went to the Melbourne Storm, he had played his last game for the West Tigers. I said that on Guru. I said that on Bloke. I felt very strongly about that. I was very surprised to actually see him return to the West Tigers. And, like previous stints that we've seen, it wasn't overly successful, sort of in and out of the footy side and whatnot. We've got to pre-season, a lot of reports being thrown around about him struggling at training, coming back a little bit underdone. A heap of stuff going on there. Whether you read into that as factual, gospel, bullshit, rumours, the Tigers putting out stories to try and put him on the out to ease the blow, I'm not too sure. You can read into that what you will. But I think it is pretty evident that both parties aren't happy with how this is all played out. I thought I'd just read to you an article that I read earlier today surrounding this move and whatnot, just to give a bit of context. This is from the Sydney Morning Herald. Tigers part company with Nofoaluma after a $300K payout. David Nofoaluma has officially parted company with West Tigers after accepting a $300,000 payout to walk away from the final 2 years of his contract. The development ends an ugly standoff between the club and its greatest try scorer, who will no longer be required to front a new look West Tigers board after an arrangement was struck to part company. The tension between the parties was at breaking point. The Tigers had issued Nofoaluma with a second breach notice within a month, while explosive accusations were made by the winger to the Rugby League Players Association that rookie coach Benji Marshall told him that he would not play NRL again if he stayed at the West Tigers. Almost 8 years ago, a nasty feud erupted between club legend Robbie Farah and then coach Jason Taylor, who tried to push the hooker out of the club by indicating his future would be in reserve grade if he stayed. Very similar situation. History was threatening to repeat itself until a severance had been agreed to on Tuesday. West Tigers declined to comment when contacted by the Herald. Nofoaluma's second sanction in a month came last week after he failed to adhere to club protocols when it comes to missing training due to illness. The veteran winger notified a club official that he was not going to be able to attend training last Monday due to a bout of gastro. However, he did not respond to the club's doctor attempts to contact him for the next 48 hours. The club, after numerous attempts by several people to contact him, had to send a player to his house to check on Nofoaluma's welfare. This masthead was first revealed in December that Nofoaluma refused to turn up to training over a perception of unfair treatment from the club, including the training methods adopted by the coaching staff. Nofoaluma struggled physically and with his fitness levels upon returning to pre-season training and was one of the team's least impressive performers in a time trial, struggling to keep up with the new standards of the club driven by coach Benji Marshall. A little bit of context there from the Sydney Morning Herald. And look, I as I said, not all divorces are bad. I think this is a really good example. I think this is best case scenario for both parties. I think that David Nofoaluma, he's a club legend. There's no denying that, especially if the West Tigers obviously came in the year 2000. About 25 years of history there. The premiership in 05, he obviously wasn't a part of that squad. But over the last 10 years or so when they've really struggled, David Nofoaluma for a long period of time has been one of the shining lights. I do think he has a lot of downfalls in his game. I've always sort of said this defensively. I've never been overly convinced on David Nofoaluma as a first grader there. He does worry me quite a bit. But in attack, you cannot question what he does. The work he does out of his own end is second to none. And it has saved the Tigers' ass over a long period of time during some pretty grim times. I think the Tigers, though, they're turning over a new leaf. They are looking for a new start. I think moving on, guys that have been a part of this unsuccessful regime for a long period of time, I think it's a good move. You want to set new standards there. You want to build a new legacy under Benji Marshall. And guys like Luke Brooks, David Nofoaluma, who I think it's fair to say have got pretty comfortable over the last few years, seemingly with where the West Tigers are at. They obviously won't say that, but that's what it looks like to me from the outside looking in. I think it is time for a change. I know the Tigers, they are very short on outside backs, so it makes sense to keep David Nofoaluma at the club. But I think culture-wise and moving on, moving into a new era with new standards, I think this is a good move. Is that to say all these problems were because of Luke Brooks and David Nofoaluma? No way. Not saying that in any way, shape or form. But I do think these are two guys that became used to the way the West Tigers have run for a very long time. They are older. They've spent a lot of time there. I think it is time for a change. I think it's time for a change with the club. I think it's great to have some new ball players in there. That's the big conversation. Who are they going to run with? Aiden Caesar, the experienced, Bud Sullivan, the young star, and of course, Latu Finu as well. On top of that, Jerome Luai arriving next year. So Luke Brooks moving on. I think it's been a huge positive for the club, and I think it'll be a huge positive for Brooksy. David Nofoaluma leaving. They're short on outside backs, as we said. But this is a move that I think needed to be made, and I think that if Nof and Benji are like this after a short amount of time, keep in mind, they were teammates for a long period of time. They played a lot of footy together and whatnot. I think it just shows that it's probably not going to work. I would imagine that coming back to preseason this year, David Nofoaluma probably would have known he was going to have to make an impression. He hasn't, it seems that way. I've heard from people inside the West Tigers, not just from this article, that seems to be the way. So that is unfortunate how that has played out. But maybe this is a little wake-up call that David Nofoaluma needs as well. He's a very talented winger. He gets through more work than most. And you know what? He's only ever defended in one system at the West Tigers. Maybe going to a new club, turning over a new leaf. I mean, if he can get that sort of stuff sorted, get back to doing the work he was doing out of his own end, you got one hell of a footballer on your hands in David Nofoaluma. So keen to see where he lands. Wouldn't be surprised to see him duck over to the Super League. I mean, he gets a payout of $300K for this season. I'm sure there will be a club that will throw him a lifeline. But the reality is with David Nofoaluma, there's always been sort of noise around him. The reality is he's been, dropped by just about every coach that he's had. To be fair, they are in a team that is really struggling. Maybe some of those coaches were trying to make statements by dropping the experienced player. It's obviously easier to drop wingers and centres than it is to drop halves and whatnot as well. So maybe there is a little bit that goes against David Nofoaluma there. But I do feel like this is the right move for the West Tigers. And I also feel like it's the right move for David Nofoaluma. Hopefully he can land on his feet, get an opportunity somewhere else. Hopefully he can prove me wrong. I've got my doubts. I think it'll be interesting to see which clubs go after him and who's willing to spend money on him. In saying that, wasn't that long ago Craig Bellamy was willing to welcome him into the inner circle down there in Melbourne. Maybe he ends up at Melbourne. Could be a potential one. I thought that he did okay there. I thought he played some good footy, and I personally thought Craig Bellamy was going to keep him down there. Wasn't meant to be. Went back to the West Tigers, and I think this one has probably played out the way that a lot of us probably expected, if we're being honest and if we're being realistic. Very keen to see what happens to David Nofoaluma, where he ends up, who gives him an opportunity, and very keen to see how he responds to this. He's a guy that's always had, a reasonably safe position in that side. He has got dropped a couple of times, but he's always found his way in. There's never been a huge competition for spots. Now he's out on his own. He's going to a new club. He's going to be uncomfortable. It's going to test him. New coaches and everything, new teammates. Very, very keen to see how David Nofoaluma fits into a new system and how he responds to this setback as well. And very keen to see how the West Tigers go with setting this new culture and this new leaf that they're turning over. Not all divorces are bad, and in my opinion, this one's a positive for both parties.